Donald Trump has a problem. The President of the United States has a severe, pressing, straightforward problem. And I am remiss to find a solution to that problem. Basically, Donald Trump is behind. By all measure, at least by my understanding of the world, Donald Trump is behind. He's behind because he's failed miserably to deal with the COVID-19 virus. He's also failed miserably to deal with a racial uprising that his presence basically inflames and intensifies. He is behind because 30 million people are out of a job, 18 million out of their health care, and a population that realizes that the things that they want from a political standpoint, policy-wise, cannot be articulated in a political space, either through Trump or through Biden, in which case you have a lot of people in the streets. Those people in the streets has changed the perspective of the public itself in regards to the way it views policing and, to some degree, in the way it views African Americans, or at the very least the allegory for African Americans, Black Lives Matter. And in doing so, all of that is to the detriment of Trump on this. You can look at the polling, even looking within the polling, where you could see how people view the way he's handled this issue. The catch here is, if you are behind, you need to have the ability to communicate and articulate what you need to get to the public to get them to change their mind and say, yes, after all, we're going to keep him in office as the president. You already have an inherent advantage by having a bully pulpit. The catch is, if Donald Trump would have knocked the COVID-19 virus out of the park and knocked the racial issue out of the park, Donald Trump would be sitting pretty right now going into the election, but that's not where we are. So he needs to be able to come up with a message, coherent, straightforward, something that the public understands is something they can get behind. And it's just so happened that Donald Trump lacks the capacity to do that. Have you heard him recently? He's desperate. Today, he was in the Rose Garden, and typically there's a formality that goes along with the whole thing of being a president. That when you're doing Rose Garden stuff, that stuff is governmental areas. The time you do campaigning is on the campaign trail. Well, Donald Trump blew that out the whack entirely. And he gives a speech that's supposed to be commemorating the bill or the legislation or whatever he's trying to push forward, the bill targeting Hong Kong, and the executive order to hold, quote-unquote, China accountable for oppressive action against the people of Hong Kong. Basically, trying to sanction people in China over their choices of their own territory, meaning Hong Kong, because Hong Kong is literally China. And so he's trying to explain that. Now, that takes all of maybe 4 minutes at the most. And then the rest of the time, about another 54 minutes, he is basically attacking Joe Biden relentlessly. He is going after Biden with both barrels blazing, as if he was at a campaign stump somewhere in Ohio. It is weird and fascinating to watch. A lot of it is meandering, kind of just going all around the road, not necessarily hitting any main particular points, other than to find ways to just attack Joe Biden. It is a weird thing to watch. And that is indeed what I'm going to show you. Welcome to the soapbox. My name is Jamarl Thomas. This is the Progressive Soapbox. Guys, if you dig this content, please like, share, and subscribe. You can always support this content through PayPal and Patreon. This is a bad look for a president. It just is. Now, this is Trump, so it's not like people are blown away by this, even though this caused a little bit of consternation because, more than anything else, they hate it when you break one of their sacred norms. Missing the fact that it's a norm, not an absolute, and it's always going to be relative to something else. Those norms were set somewhere by somebody, at which point they weren't norms at that point. If Donald Trump does this, I don't have any entirely strong feelings about it, but I'm not a Trump supporter. I don't pay attention to Donald Trump. Everything that comes out of his mouth, I assume, is a lie, with the exception of things that can be corroborated. And so, am I shocked by this? No. Is there a job to do as president, even if you're doing it poorly? Yes. And is that separate from your campaign? The answer is yes. You as an individual who is trying to run for office and get involved in an office, the office is a construct. mental, cerebral, conceptual, yes, but it's a construct. It's like a bus. If you had a conceptual bus and you had a person who was driving that bus, the politician would be the person driving that particular bus, especially if he's going to be president. But he is not, in fact, the construct. He is not, in fact, the bus. Meaning there's a difference. There's a distinction between who Donald Trump is when he's running his campaign as a man who's trying to retain his stature as president, continue to drive the bus, as opposed to the bus itself. The bus is the government artifact. It's the thing to which people occupy. But there's a separation between who that person is versus who that person is when he's within the aura of the office. When he's at the Rose Garden speech, he's in an aura of the office. And yet, he's talking as if he's somebody on a campaign. That's the issue with it. But let's hear Trump. This is what the basic idea of what this was supposed to be about. And honestly, after this, he could have pretty much ended it, because this is basically what Trump is trying to say here with this press conference.
Today I signed
Now, think for a moment. If you're China and a representative from China, and you're aware of U.S. history, you know what it is. You know we've backed dictators, bloody, brutal, vicious dictators. We've backed kill squads, singing in the daylight terrorists, thick-neck rapists and neck choppers, head choppers, let alone the open-air ghetto in Palestine. The speech is ludicrous on its face. Hong Kong belongs to China. I don't care what goes on in China, if I'm being bluntly honest with you. I care in so much it affects me, and maybe even how it affects the larger world, yes, but matters internal to China are internal to China, just like matters that are internal to the U.S. are internal to the U.S., and I balk at another country trying to tell this country what it should or shouldn't do, especially if it's not trespassing over the rights of that particular country, issues of sovereignty. Now, we trespass over issues of sovereignty all the time, which is why I have this channel and why I try to point that out, that this is problematic if you're trying to live in a cohesive world. But Donald Trump basically doing the typical U.S. line and using Hong Kong as a vector of attack against China, who the United States at this point just deems as an enemy. You must understand, from the United States logic, from its standpoint, this is a zero-sum game. The goal of this is domination, world control, or at the very least control through the standpoint of influence, be it political, military, or economic. All of these things are used in order to control, basically, how the world operates to broad degrees, especially from the standpoint of the things that are owned and the things that can be controlled. What has happened, though, is we've eroded in regards to our internal processes that have allowed us to have that firm base to which to have that level of domination. We've also, to some degree, forgotten that there is no endpoint to this. This is not like chess where you just checkmate the king and everybody goes home. Things continue. And you're going to have countries that evolve just like you evolved and get stronger just like you got stronger. And what are you going to do when that takes place? Are you going to recede with a certain degree of dignity, or are you going to go down taking the world in a ball of flames? Well, that's kind of the question that is availing us at this point. China has 1.2 billion people, if I'm not mistaken. The U.S. has 300 million, 320 million on a good day. They have, 3-4 times our population. And from a technological standpoint, their technology has been expanding rapidly because our companies wanted to get banging rich, move many of those jobs abroad, and in me moving those jobs abroad, signed agreements with China where their country could somehow grow also, where you can't necessarily just rate their population and take the profits without necessarily leaving anything behind as they can grow as a base. Well, this has allowed China to grow and expand at such a degree that it freaks out the US, especially when you take a posture that you want a certain degree of global domination. China is not within a sphere of domination. Russia is not within the sphere of domination. Same thing with Iran, same thing with Syria. And yet all of these countries are under full court press because of that very specific reason. That's important to understand when you're looking at why the U.S. does what it does in regards to what it says, in regards to how it acts towards countries that it finds to be at odds with its particular agenda of control. Now, this control has an economic sphere, this control has a geopolitical sphere, but those things in many respects dovetail when we're talking about China. Now, whatever China wants, meaning whatever their government wants to accomplish in the world, growing is something that I would imagine them, like any other country, would deem to be sacred and their own right, insofar as rights exist. Meaning, if you can grow and expand, we should have the ability to also fulfill what we can fulfill as a country on our own. But that's not necessarily the way it goes, especially if one of the other actors in the game space is looking at this as we need to stop you, we need to inhibit you in any kind of way we can by hook or by crook. And in this case, it's going to be by crook. The attacks on China are bipartisan, and they're bipartisan for that reason. I keep making the point that there's only one party. You just have two gradients that you have basically been lied to into believing that these things are somehow different or that these two things represent different parties. Sanders would have represented somewhat of a different party. He has a different idea of the world. He has a different philosophical priority of the world. Both of these groups, both of these parties, for the most part, have the same basic framework of the world with a slight gradients in how much they want to rate the population, to put it bluntly. And so this is where we are, right? We have this kind of, despite everything that's going on in the U.S., problems that avail us, we still are going after China. Hong Kong is a way of doing that. If China would have overreacted and sent in military, the world would have turned around and pointed to China and would have allowed a provocative response from some other countries in the world, especially the UK and probably especially the United States. And I just mean provocative, not military-wise, but screaming for sanctions, hollering, trying to get these kind of publicity things of pointing at China. That's what would have taken place. If they didn't do anything, then you would have had a situation of just utter anarchy, which would have also served the aims of the people who are trying to undermine the country. So it's not necessarily a straightforward predicament for China to navigate, but as navigating it, you don't necessarily have a choice in taking some actions, knowing that there are going to be repercussions for those actions. You're just cornered in regards to your decision space. By the same token, Hong Kong is China's, and China has been able to forge relationships around the world. And so, whatever sanctions the United States may be throwing here, I'm not quite sure how that's going to adversely affect a country that size. Not to mention that country can respond. So here's Trump now going after Joe Biden. And after I show this, I'm going to point to just a random section of that video where Trump is talking. And at any random section, you can hear him going after Biden. It's like an hour speech. It is utterly bonkers.
Been given a lot of credit for what I did there. It took a certain amount of courage, I guess, because
Now, here's the thing. If you want to hit Obama for doing trade deals and wanted to push through the Trans-Pacific Partnership, fair enough. But let's be clear, that was a private enterprise thing. Like, what he's not saying here is that those companies saw an opportunity to say, all right, one of our largest costs is labor. We're paying this guy $18 to do this job. But now we can move that job to China and we could pay $4. And that worker would be exceedingly happy with those $4 because everybody else is making a little bit less. Now, it is true that that American worker loses a job, but we gain all of that money in profit. And the cost to ship it overseas back into the United States is minuscule compared to the amount that we save in labor. Now, you add in supplies and all of this other stuff to it. Well, at this point, you have companies that are moving from the United States into countries like China. The enticement, though, wasn't because Obama forced them to do so. The enticement were those companies trying to find ways to maximize their profit at the expense of their workers. And understand, the company is not there to hold on to workers. It is not their job. The company is there entirely to make a profit. You must understand, that is infinitely necessary to understand. When the COVID-19 crisis hit and the companies start dropping off people, why? They start dropping off people because they can afford them. They're not there to keep that worker on. That worker is only there for a particular job. That person who's running that company wants to get as much profit and expropriate as much of that profit as necessary to the top. That's what they do. That's what it's for. The job thing and giving people a job is happenstance. If they can get rid of those workers at McDonald's, Wendy's, Burger King, etc. tomorrow and save 5 cents on it by putting in a burger flipping robot, they would do it. If they could get rid of those workers at those clothing stores, so you walk in, you pick what you want, and as you walk out, your credit card gets scanned, I'm telling you, that's coming. They will do it. As a software engineer, I wrote computer programs that eliminated the need for like 3 people at the company. No, the company didn't fire people, but those people could be moved over to other resources. But I'm telling you, on larger scales, those things are being done because our society, our economic system is based not on providing things. The providing things is happenstance. It's the stupid human trick after the fact. The goal of it is profit. The priority continues to be profit. Those companies seeking the great profit went abroad, ship their products back here. It's the most logical, rational thing in the world. Now, if you're an American who lost your job because of that, you may be pretty pissed off for that. You should be pissed off, but understand that's a bipartisan consensus. There is nobody to vote for to stop that process. And just because Trump stopped the Trans-Pacific Partnership doesn't necessarily mean the next guy who comes in won't fulfill that policy. And you will have the Republican Party backing that person as he does it. Let's take a look at a random segment of Trump at the campaign stump. Now, and understand why I say that, by the way. I say that, by the way, because you could say government could pass policy to prevent companies from doing that. That's fair. You could say that governments can create incentives or disincentives in the way that companies operate. That is also fair. However, considering that 90% of your congressional races are won by the side with the most cash, these guys spend 75% of their time begging for cash. Their perspectives are going to take and appropriate it from the people who they talk to the most in this regard. They're not going to go against their financial interests anymore than the president or any of the government. I'm saying that weirdly, but basically they're not going to go against their financial interests in order to prevent those companies from doing that, who are also going for their financial interests. The American worker in that case doesn't matter. There is nobody who's in Congress like that. Broad strokes, a few people that is standing up for that. And standing up for this kind of economy that doesn't function in those ways. How weird is this economy where you have workers who basically work themselves to the bone their entire life from cradle to grave. And after they stop working, they get nothing. The society basically says, thank you for your labor. Thank you for your mental energies. We have no use for you anymore. And it's opposed to having these people decent living when they get older, making sure they can get health care, making sure we should and can do better. That's my point. And if we're talking about a company, it is infinitely impossible for Jeff Bezos to have $176 billion without those workers at that company, without those people buying those products, without roads being built to get that from point A to point B. Government is doing that. Without the schooling for those people to even do that job that Jeff Bezos has them to do. There's all sorts of externalities that Jeff Bezos doesn't necessarily have to pay. And yet believes that appropriating $176 billion is perfectly okay, while his workers get basically minimum basic wage. I guess I'm saying we need to look at how we're doing this and ask whether or not this is a legitimate way to operate. Because the way we're operating, Trump is trying to blame Obama and Biden. That's not an Obama and Biden thing. That's basically a profit-seeking enterprise thing. And I don't know how you tackle that with people in power like this. Let's random part of the speech. Yeah, right here.
Our country.
Do you know how stupid that sounds? Do you know how stupid that sounds? Oh, the United States is this weak dandelion that everyone is taking advantage of. They're just having turns with us. This is obscene. The European Union formed basically initially was like a cartel of sorts of trade between nations, but it grew more and more and started taking on political control and those type of things. They were working for their best interests. Why wouldn't they do that? If they wanted to form, they'd be able to be some kind of backstop against the United States. If the United States could work with each individual country of Europe, they could basically play one against the other, kind of like the same way that companies do here in the United States, where they would say, what are you going to give me for benefits to get me to settle my company down here as opposed to down there? As opposed to the entire country saying, we're not going to give you anything. If you settle down, you settle down, but you're not going to be paid for it. Well, if you could pluck away the states in Europe, and you could play this state against the other state. You can get some kind of benefit, some kind of bonus, some kind of thing out of this particular place. Europe realized that it needed to have the ability to compete with the U.S. And that the way you could compete with the U.S. basically is having Europe, all those countries, join a union. And when they negotiate from the standpoint of the entirety of the union. Now, Trump doesn't like that because he wants to be able to take advantage of the smaller countries, similar to the way he's about to take advantage of the UK. That's assuming he wins next election. Let's hear another piece of Trump logic. Let's see from where. Random place.
The people that have done So listen to this.
Now, thing is, I don't know how much honesty there is into this. I'm pretty sure there's probably some gradation into this. I have a hard time believing that Joe Biden is taking the position and arguing that immigrants who are coming into the country should get welfare benefits immediately. Maybe he is, maybe he's not. Who knows? Look, if you want to stop immigrants from coming to your country, if you're that type of like, you know what, I don't want people from South America coming to the United States, then you got to stop fucking with South America. Meaning, if you're in a situation where Bolivia and you have somebody like Evo Morales that is bringing uplifting these people out of poverty, getting the indigenous population, who's I think makes 70% of the country, into the government itself, meaning you are basically uplifting and doing your country a benefit. When you have these left-leaning governments in South American countries that have trying to undo the legacy that the United States has basically left with either drug gangs or terrorists, or for that matter, dictators who are basically taking over in order to sell resources to the U.S. for cheap, for example, bananas, coming up with the term banana republic, for example. Well, that destabilizes those countries. And that destabilization in and of itself creates these kind of hazardous war zones where the rational human being leaves. I don't want to be here. I don't want to raise my kid here. I don't want anything to happen to me and my family. So I am going to leave. That's the most rational thing in the world. Now, your issue is whatever happens to them, despite our policy, we don't want them coming here. Your policy of driving them here. I'm saying you can't have it both ways. You can shut the border. You can do all that stuff. That's not going to stop people from trying to get here and with that very specific issue that you consider to be a problem. And this goes for anywhere around the world. If you ensure that the places around the world had the things that they need and could basically upkeep their society, grow their society into infrastructure and everything else, people would be more inclined to stay where they are because they would have the things that they need where they are. The moment that you go destroying Libya, destroying Syria, destroying Afghanistan and Iraq, and you have all of these people who are basically migrating out of some of the African nations in order to get into places like Germany or anywhere in Europe, you have created your monsters. Meaning the European shift to the right that was taking place had a lot to do with the people who were coming into Europe, started by the wars of the United States. Yes, France and the UK helped, and yeah, there are troops from multiple countries over there, but still, you get my point. It was the wars itself that created the incentive for people to leave those various countries and go to Europe, which creates consternation in Europe, which created this kind of right-wing shift. Europe, at no point, patsies that they are, pointed to the United States and made the point that your foreign policy is basically destabilizing our domestic policy. Doesn't come up, nobody cares. I'm just, very basic point. If you don't want people coming here, you need to ensure that where they are is intact. We have a united world. I keep saying this. We're not islands unto ourselves. Things that happen around the world do have impact. And when those things have impact on other people, those people are going to some degree, make that impact felt on us, however that is. That could be a bomb, that could be a homeless person, that could be whatever however that takes the effect of the thing that bothers you in regards to the way your society is organized. And it's very explicit case, however, Donald Trump, who has been trying to get rid of and destabilize Venezuela, with the government going so far as to permitting a contract where a bunch of goons will go into the country and murder as many people as necessary in order to get to Maduro, in order to install Guaido, somebody who nobody knows wasn't elected to a pie shop. This is the nonsense that we're doing in this country. In Honduras, we had Hillary Clinton bragging, talking about the guy got escorted out in his pajamas, but that wasn't, in fact, a coup. And yeah, Evo Morales, who it seems that the U.S. did have some kind of input in regards to assisting that, if with the influence from the OAS. Stop bitching about stuff that you're causing. And if you don't have the sense and competence enough to know that you're doing that, then that's a whole nother issue. Joe Biden, 5 years ago, might have said the same thing. That's the sad part. Let's see. That's random other piece. All of these are just random plop-ins. That's what I mean. This entire speech was him just basically attacking Joe Biden. Let's go here.
Inmates, so federal
That doesn't mean no windows. That doesn't mean no windows. If if there was a company in your town or city, whatever town and city you are, and every day at the end of the work shift, several men come out with buckets of sludge and they just dump them into your river, you'd have feelings about that. In fact, you may even try to get them prosecuted for doing so, saying that they are damaging the environment. This is going against ecological guidelines and whatnot. This is a horrible, horrible thing. Then you find out this company wasn't even paying any taxes to the federal government because of tax breaks. So basically, they're providing some service to somebody, but they're also dumping a bunch of shit in the water that is getting people sick and is making our habitable environment that much worse. These are negative externalities. These are things that are being dropped off from the company itself that the company otherwise doesn't have to pay for. Meaning, in trying to upgrade their processes so maybe they don't create that particular sludge, well, that's an expense. They don't want to pay for that particular expense because that works into the bottom line issue. And so if your goal is to maximize profit and you can avoid paying that expense, you avoid paying that expense. Well, your company, your society, though, may force them to pay that expense, especially if it was involved in dealing with issues of water contamination or whatever. Now, imagine for the moment, though, that you had something like that sludge, but you couldn't see it. Meaning, a company goes out every evening, dumps it, tons, and go back in and do their job. Now, I'm trying to make this allegory in regards to kind of carbon. You have companies that have been dumping stuff in our atmosphere. Yes, we can't necessarily see it. That doesn't stop it from being garbage or trash or things that are negatively affecting us, and have been doing this for decades. Gotten to the point even back in the early 80s, they even knew, ExxonMobil knew that this was taking place by their own studies and their own scientists. Well, should there be consequences for that? And more importantly, over top of the consequences of them making billions of dollars off of dumping trash into our atmosphere, it's going to kill us. Either you're disbelieving that the scientists who studied this stuff are right, and you potentially could be right, but considering you're a flagrant liar that doesn't know much, I'm going to err on the side of caution and go on this with the scientists. Considering the magnitude of what could go wrong, I think it behooves us to not give a shit about the thing that's not real, meaning the cash in this element, which is the thing that Donald Trump is focused on. No, our world matters more. And our world mattering more, even if I'm wrong, the worst that you get is a cleaner environment. If you're wrong, you end the world. Let's do one more, and we'll call it a day.
Gotcha. One of the
Just to pause there for a moment. We'll be in some mess. We'll be in some mess. To show you what mess is, take a look at this. This is a site that keeps track of the daily COVID numbers. Yesterday, 935 deaths. And this looks like one of the old, month ago numbers where it was 1,200, 1,000, etc. day after day after day. 2 days ago, it was 468. I don't get the day before this, but I do know that previous days it did hit up to 900 and so forth again. That is a mess, especially when you have almost 140,000 people dead. Yeah, 138,000 people dead from this virus, on top of the millions that are infected, 3.4 minus 3.5 million people infected with the virus. That's a mess. Having people still protesting today. If you put in protests, you'll see a litany of protests taking place all across the United States. That's a mess. All of those things are a mess. And I have to believe that a ham sandwich could have done a better job. Meaning, if you weren't there and the government just has to run on basic processes from the various institutions, I suspect we would have done a better job than the fact that you being there and just fucking it up. I'll end this here. Like, share, and subscribe. Marcus Will. We can't hear what Trump is saying. You can't hear what Trump is saying. Hold on. Oh, you can't hear what Trump is saying. Shit, I'm going to do this video again. Oh, I know why. Thank you, Marcus, for giving me the heads up. Alright, so let's try this again. I'm going to kill this video. I'll be back, and we'll be able to hear what Trump is saying. See you in a few.